The history of Persia is filled with vast empires, powerful kings, and battles that shaped the destiny of nations. Among all the wars that unfolded across this land, one stands out not only for its bloodshed, but also for the betrayal, courage, and split-second decisions that defined it. This was the war that would come to be known as the bloodiest in Persian history. Persia at that time was a sprawling empire, stretching from the northern mountains to the southern deserts, from the western lakes to the eastern borders. Cities were wealthy and populous, and kings ruled with absolute authority. Yet such power always invited threats. Neighbors coveted Persia's lands and riches, and ambition and treachery brewed within the court. Reports arrived from the borders. Enemies were uniting and preparing to strike. The king ordered his forces to full readiness. Fortresses were reinforced, and soldiers stationed at the front lines. Yet behind these preparations, betrayal was quietly unfolding. Commanders who were supposed to remain loyal secretly passed information to the enemy, or acted out of selfish ambition. From the very beginning, this war was waged not only on the battlefield, but also in minds and hearts. On the first morning of battle, a thick mist hung over the vast field. Soldiers' shields and armor gleamed, yet none could foresee the horrors that awaited. The shouts of commanders and the clash of swords filled the air. Hundreds of soldiers lost their lives, the ground soaked with blood, and the sky darkened with smoke and dust. Amidst this devastation, stories of bravery emerged. A lone soldier held back countless enemies, while a commander made a split-second decision that saved thousands of lives. This war was as much psychological as it was physical. Every choice and movement carried consequences for the entire empire. Persian soldiers faced not only direct combat, but also the enemy's tactical maneuvers and betrayal behind the lines. Entire regiments were trapped and destroyed due to the treachery of allies. Yet clever soldiers and experienced commanders managed to create temporary tactical victories through complex maneuvers and surprise attacks. Historical accounts describe a regiment that, despite being surrounded, launched a sudden counterattack that turned the tide, saving hundreds of soldiers and boosting the morale of the army. Still, such temporary victories were minor compared to the relentless violence of the battlefield. One of the darkest aspects of this war was the betrayal behind the lines. Commanders who should have been loyal to the king collaborated with the enemy, sharing critical information. These betrayals not only caused massive casualties but also left the king and his advisors in constant doubt and stress. In one recorded instance, an entire regiment fell into an enemy trap due to a commander's treachery and was annihilated. This event taught a harsh lesson. Even the closest allies could not always be trusted, and every decision required extreme caution and intelligence. Amidst the carnage, tales of heroism emerged. A lone soldier fought against dozens of enemies to allow the retreat of his comrades. A commander, faced with a sudden enemy attack, made a split-second strategic decision that altered the course of the battlefield and saved thousands of lives. These moments, beyond their narrative appeal, revealed the human dimension of war, courage, fear, and the weight of responsibility. After days and weeks of relentless fighting, the land was devastated, cities burned, and thousands perished. The war permanently changed Persian history. Kings who had once wielded immense power were forced to make decisions that altered the empire's trajectory. Political maps shifted, borders were redefined, and new powers emerged. This war was not merely a military conflict, it was a historical lesson, a story of bravery, betrayal, power, and downfall that generations would remember. Looking back, we realize that history is never linear or simple. Wars are a combination of individual courage, split-second decisions, betrayals, and complex strategies. Every soldier, every commander, and every decision by the king had the potential to reshape the destiny of a nation. This is what made this conflict the bloodiest and most unforgettable war in Persian history. The battlefield was filled with smoke, screams, and the clash of steel. The focus was not only on mass battles, but also on the heroics of individuals and critical decisions of the king. Betrayals behind the lines shaped the outcome as much as the frontline clashes. The social, political, and historical consequences of the war were immense. These stories of sacrifice, courage, and power struggle would live on long after the battlefield fell silent. آیا مایل هستید این متن را The battlefield had barely cooled when the echoes of the first clash still haunted the plains. Soldiers moved with cautious steps, eyes scanning the horizon for signs of the enemy. The dust had not yet settled, and yet the air was thick with tension, fear, and anticipation. What had started as a single confrontation had quickly escalated into a conflict that would consume thousands of lives and reshape Persia forever. The king, seated in his tent, watched maps and charts with a heavy heart. Each decision he made carried the weight of an entire empire. Messages arrived with alarming frequency. A fortress had fallen, a supply line was disrupted, a regiment had vanished. The king's advisors debated endlessly, some urging caution, others advocating bold action. Amid the chaos, whispers of betrayal circulated. A general who had been entrusted with protecting the northern flank was suspected of secretly aiding the enemy, and the king could feel the weight of mistrust in every corner of his court. As the days passed, the fighting intensified. Cavalry charges collided with fortified lines, archers rained arrows upon infantry, and the clash of swords echoed like thunder. Soldiers began to understand that this war was unlike any they had faced before. It was not merely about territory or pride, it was about survival, strategy, and the fragile balance between loyalty and ambition. The stories of individual bravery became legends even before the battles ended. One soldier, barely more than a boy, held the bridge against overwhelming odds, buying enough time for reinforcements to arrive. Another commander, realizing that his flank was about to collapse, ordered a daring counterattack that turned the tide in favor of Persia, if only temporarily. These moments, fleeting and dangerous, became the lifeblood of hope in a war dominated by death and despair. Yet for every act of courage, there were acts of betrayal that cut even deeper. Spies infiltrated camps, carrying secrets to the enemy. Allies turned their swords against the very men they were supposed to protect. The king, torn between trust and suspicion, had to constantly weigh his decisions, knowing that one misstep could result in catastrophic loss. The battlefield was not the only place where blood was spilled. Deception, manipulation, and cunning played equally deadly roles. Amid the chaos, civilians were not spared. Villages along the front lines were razed, crops burned, and families displaced. The war did not simply stay within the bounds of the battlefield, it spread its shadow over every part of the empire. Rumors of massacres and atrocities traveled faster than any messenger could. Fear became a constant companion to those living in the borderlands, and even those far from the fighting felt the tremors of a kingdom under siege. One particularly brutal day saw the northern plains consumed in a storm of arrows and fire. Entire battalions were annihilated in a matter of hours. The cries of the wounded mingled with the chants of commanders rallying their troops. Amid this horror, the king's own elite guard faced a sudden ambush, a betrayal that shook the empire's morale. Yet the soldiers, inspired by a sense of duty and honor, fought back with unprecedented ferocity. Stories from that day would later be passed down as legends of resilience against impossible odds. The war also became a stage for political intrigue and power struggles within the empire itself. Nobles who had long held sway in the court now maneuvered for advantage, exploiting the chaos to expand their influence. Some formed secret alliances, plotting to alter the outcome of the war for their own gain. The king, aware of these internal threats, had to constantly recalibrate his strategies, not just on the battlefield but within his own palace. Every decision was a gamble, with the lives of thousands hanging in the balance. As weeks turned into months, the relentless fighting took its toll. Disease and famine spread among the troops and civilians alike. Exhaustion, both physical and mental, became a silent adversary. Soldiers fought not only against an external enemy, but also against the creeping despair that threatened to consume them. And yet, the human spirit endured. Even in the darkest moments, acts of heroism, loyalty, and self-sacrifice emerged as beacons of hope. One of the most pivotal moments in the war occurred when a decisive battle at a strategic river crossing determined the future of the campaign. The enemy, confident and overextended, was caught off guard by a coordinated assault. Persian forces, under the leadership of a commander known for his tactical genius, managed to encircle the opposition. What followed was a clash of unparalleled intensity. Arrows blotted out the sun, swords shattered shields, and the cries of the fallen filled the air. Victory came at a terrible cost, with thousands dead, but it marked a turning point that would eventually tip the balance in favor of Persia. Throughout this prolonged conflict, the king and his advisors continually faced dilemmas that tested their wisdom and courage. Decisions about whether to press an attack, defend a position, or negotiate were never straightforward. Each choice carried consequences that would echo far beyond the battlefield. One wrong move could invite disaster. One brilliant strategy could secure survival and glory. The interplay of human judgment, chance, and the brutal realities of war created a story that was as unpredictable as it was devastating. As the war dragged on, its effects rippled throughout the empire. Economies strained under the weight of constant supply needs, trade routes were disrupted, and morale faltered in towns and cities far from the front lines. Families mourned sons, brothers, and fathers lost in combat, while those who survived bore the physical and psychological scars of a campaign that seemed endless. In this way, the war reshaped Persian society, leaving marks that would last generations. The The aftermath revealed the full scale of the bloodshed. Entire regions were depopulated, cities lay in ruins, and the landscape bore the scars of relentless combat. The king, once commanding an empire that appeared unshakable, now faced the daunting task of reconstruction and reconciliation. Political maps were redrawn, alliances reshaped, and the balance of power permanently altered. Lessons from this war would influence Persian strategy and governance for decades to come. Yet, amid the horror, there were lessons of resilience and courage. The war highlighted the human capacity for bravery in the face of impossible odds, the complexities of loyalty and trust, and the profound consequences of leadership decisions. Tales of individual heroism, soldiers holding a bridge against impossible numbers, commanders making split-second tactical choices, became stories passed down through generations, inspiring future leaders and citizens alike. This conflict was more than a military engagement. It was a crucible that tested the limits of human endurance, strategy, and morality. It demonstrated how a single event could alter the fate of an entire nation. Persia's bloodiest war was not just about the clash of armies. It was about the clash of ambition, loyalty, courage, and betrayal. It was a war that reshaped an empire and left a legacy that would be remembered in history books, oral traditions, and the collective memory of a people. Even centuries later, historians and storytellers reflect on this war not merely as a historical event, but as a human story, a tale of suffering, sacrifice, heroism, and the harsh realities of leadership and decision-making. Its lessons remain relevant: the importance of strategic thinking, the dangers of misplaced trust, the resilience required to survive catastrophe, and the enduring human capacity for courage in moments of extreme adversity. The bloodiest war in Persian history stands as a testament to both the fragility and strength of human civilization. It reminds us that history is shaped not only by the grand movements of empires but also by the individual acts of bravery, cunning, and resolve. The legacy of this conflict continues to inform our understanding of leadership, loyalty, and the costs of power. In the end, what remains is the story itself, etched in the land, the surviving records, and the memories passed down through generations. It is a story of people who faced overwhelming odds and yet left a mark on history, ensuring that the lessons, horrors, and heroism of this monumental war would never be forgotten.